Hello everybody. As of late, with Tamron's new lenses for the Sony full-frame mirrorless camera system, things have been a little bit hit or miss. I started off, at least in the telephoto range, I started off with the 70-180mm f2.8 VXD, which I loved. I may actually marry it. And then I was left just a little bit flat over that 28-200mm f2.8 f5.6. That's the RXD. It's won all kinds of awards. Personally, like I said, it just wasn't one of my favorite lenses from Tamron. My opinion, I guess. But anyway, fine lens, just didn't care for it too much. And then lastly, redemption comes in the form of Tamron's brand new 70-300mm f4.5 f6.3 Di3 RXD. Gotta love these lens names, folks. I have shot literally all over the country with this, all over the southeast, all over the southwest, and everywhere in between. Folks, absolute joy to shoot, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, normally I do these massive reviews of the lenses and the cameras, but I've heard you guys. I'm going to kind of try to condense this one down just a little bit. We're going to, of course, talk about the lens, a few quirks, my likes, my dislikes, and then take a look at some of the raw and processed image samples made with this lens. I also want to mention there will of course be a full written review with all the specs from the Tamron website and a few of my sample images and thoughts over on contrastly.com about the same time that this video was posted. Now, of course, you know I love to measure and weigh things myself, so I have the actual physical specs that I have taken of this lens right here. Overall, with the hood, length 8.5 inches. That's not extended. 8.5 inches, that's 21.59 centimeters. With the hood extended, you're looking at 10.75 inches. That's 27.31 centimeters. The interesting thing comes when we talk about the weight. And first of all, before I say anything else, this lens is extraordinarily light. So much lighter than I thought it would be when I first saw the specs on paper. Believe it or not, this is the lightest of those telephoto lenses. According to Tamron's website, at least it weighs 19.2 ounces. That's 545 grams. That's the interesting part that I'm going to go back to in just a second. So it's 545 grams, 19.2 ounces. Compare that to that 28-200mm. And you're looking at 575 grams or 1.27 pounds. Comparing that to that VXD autofocus lens, the Tamron 70-180mm f2.8. Lots of size and at least weight difference there. That lens is going to be 1.78 pounds. That's just over 1 3/4 pound or 810 grams. So you're getting a lot of zoom and a very, very, very lightweight package. Now, the reason I said that the weight was interesting is because that spec that I quoted you, that 19.2 ounces, 545 grams, that's directly from Tamron USA's website. When I used my digital scale, very peculiar, no big deal really, but something I wanted to mention, the carry weight. And when I say carry weight, that means the lens hood attached, no front cap, and then no rear cap. I figure you have this on your camera, you're not going to have the rear cap on, you're probably going to have the front cap in your pocket as well. So this is what I consider the carry weight. With the hood and this configuration, my scale showed 597 grams, 23.06 ounces, and then without the hood, it showed 535 grams and 18.87 ounces. So, like I said, my scales, could very well not be the most accurate ones in the world, but it was a weird discrepancy to find that from Tamron's website being 545, and we're landing kind of on either side of their weight, at least in that configuration. And I don't know, it's very strange to me. Like I said, not a big deal, but I wanted to note that for you. Something else certainly to note, one of the things that I noticed right off the bat when I took the 70-300 out of the box, well, for one thing, beautiful lens. It matches the A7R Mark III that I was shooting with perfectly. I always love Tamron's understated good looks, if that makes any sense to you. But look at the lens barrel. Extremely sterile. What are we not seeing here? We're not seeing a zoom lock, and that has been something present on, I think, virtually every Tamron telephoto lens I've ever tested, if I can recall, and that's not even just Sony, that includes the Canon EF mount. This one, even though it is light, I really would have loved to have a zoom lock on this, because I'll tell you why. On some extended hikes, especially I was out in Arizona, this one I had it on a strap, nose down, I don't know, maybe 4.5, 5 miles total distance, constant jarring. Look at that lens drift. Here you can see it and not drop it. But yeah, a few heavy steps, especially if you're me, over a few hours, and that really drifts down. Not a problem operationally, and especially in most situations, but in that particular situation out there in the Arizona desert, very dusty indeed. And I just like having my lenses that are zoom lenses, non-prime lenses, to be as buttoned up as I can get them, so that dirt doesn't make it in there and then finally make its way into the elements. Now, speaking of that, this does, of course, have Tamron's excellent, absolutely excellent weather sealing. If you watched any of my other reviews, you know I love talking about this at length. On the lens bayonet, probably can't see that very well, but on that lens bayonet, you have, just zoom in, why not? You have this rubber O-ring, and as far as I know, you have sealing, same rubberization on the zoom and the focusing rings as well. Now, speaking of that, the zoom and the focus rings, very smooth, not too tight, not too loose. The zoom on this one, I mean, it's not, there again, it's nothing huge. It just seems like it's a little easy to roll out, and then you hit a hard stop at the long and short end of the focal length range. But overall, zoom, focusing ring, does exactly what it should do. It zooms and focuses. This one does take advantage of all of Sony's new in-camera lens corrections. That's chromatic aberration. That is your lens vignetting, barrel distortion, and of course the image stabilization. In my case, the Sony a7R Mark III has about 5 stops of image stabilization built into that. You also have the ability, this lens is compatible with all of the autofocus, current autofocus systems of Sony's full frame and crop sensor cameras. That's the hybrid, the iDetect, the 70-300. It will work with all of those. Tamron is still laying there strong with that 67mm filter thread size. You've heard me talk about this before. Some people don't like it. I personally don't have any problem with it. As far as I know, all of Tamron's lenses for Sony full frame mirrorless cameras, or full, they work on crop sensor Sony cameras as well. They all have the 67mm filter thread, and that means that's going to be that 24mm, 35mm, they're 24 to 70 or 28 to 75mm, they're 17 to 28mm, the 70 to 180, the 20 to 200, and now the 70 to 300. I've reviewed all those, but believe it or not, they all have the same size filter. Very convenient if you really want to invest in a lot of Sony Tamron glass. 7 circular aperture blades. Bokeh on this one. Of course, I don't usually shoot portraits anyway. Bokeh looked fine on this. It's kind of creamy, not very spotted, which is what you would actually be expecting from the 7 aperture blades. A lot of these lenses have 9 on there. I still think you would be fine using this for portraits, especially at the long end of the focal length. And we're going to talk about this more when we head over to the computer and actually look at some of those image samples, which we're going to do here in just a second. But I really didn't notice anything. It was very peculiar because on some focal lengths, you can see a little bit of vignetting, more so than others, but that doesn't always necessarily coincide with, like I noticed some barrel distortion at like 250mm and above. But the vignetting, I didn't see much on that end of the focal length, but rather around the 70 to 100mm mark. A lot of vignetting, but no pin cushion distortion. So you had some contradictions there. Again, a lot of that is handled in camera now, especially if you have any kind of more modern Sony camera. There is not, at least when this review is being made, I think the latest version of Lightroom Classic was version 10, build V10. They did not have a lens profile on there. Adobe didn't at the time. Of course, with every update, they're adding those in there, so nothing to worry about. But you can go in and add Tamron's 70-300mm 4556, and it seemed to work just fine to take care of some of that little bit of vignetting and that lens distortion that I'd mentioned. And that being said, guys, like I said, I don't really even count vignetting much anymore unless it's extremely heavy, because I normally add at least some measure of it back in my post-processing anyway. So I don't think it's going to be definitely anything you would need to worry about, especially with the 70-300 if you process anyway remotely the same way that I do. All right, that's got all that good stuff wrapped up. Let's head to the computer, take a look at some of those image samples, because guys, something that really surprised me about this thing, I was not expecting how well it was going to perform in low light. That's a 70-300mm with a modest maximum aperture, 4.5 on the short end, 6.3 on the long end. Man, well, anyway, just let me show you. So it is time to finally take a look at some of the actual image samples from the Tamron 70-300mm f4.5 f6.3 Di3 RXD. Our first one up here, if you follow me on Instagram at all, you would have saw me making these images. This is in Tucumcari, New Mexico, about 4:30 a.m., 4:30 in the morning. I was walking down the middle of Route 66 like a psychopath, testing out this lens. This one here, it is a TIFF. This has been processed, so it's definitely not a raw file or anything, but what are we, ISO, you can look right here at the top left at any time to see the actual specs. All these image samples were shot at, by the way. But this was an ISO 4000. Look at the sharpness. All these are handheld, of course, 1/80th of a second. You're still more or less in that reciprocity, no, we call it reciprocity rule, but of course not really a rule, just more or less a guideline. The sharpness, very good on that. 5 stops of image stabilization inherent in the Sony A7R Mark III, which is what I was shooting with. Here we have I think this is a completely raw image. I think I've messed with the contrast just a little bit. I mentioned this in the written review. This lens is very contrasty. Depending on some situations, such as this, it may even be overly contrasted. That's why I downed the contrast quite a bit there to help reduce some of the noise at ISO 4000, but then again to kind of bring back some of the details and the shadows. Very few times did I have any issues with the autofocus, especially at the wider end of the focal length range. This was at 112 millimeters. You can see this one is just not tack sharp. It's not motion. I was focusing on this car here. I think we are possibly a little back focused, just a little bit there. Moving on, same area in Tucumcari. This is a raw file, processed just slightly for the exposure. The reason I actually shot this was exclusively for this beautiful RGB color line up here. You even have some yellow thrown in there. Very, very cool. I think the white balance may be off just a tad. Yeah, let's get that a little bit better for you to see more true to life. That is a raw, more or less, from the 70-300mm. 70 millimeters again, 1/50th of a second f4.5. That is the maximum aperture at that focal length range. A little bit further down the road here, f4.5 again, maximum aperture, again, down the contrast, because you can see that's how it was before, and there's after, but look at this sharpness again. That's 1/100th of a second handheld, 74 millimeters. Again, I can't really get over how well this lens performed in low light. This next image, another processed one. I really like this one of these gas pumps. This was at 1/60th at 300, and this is where you can really tell that image stabilization is beginning to help me out here. Maximum aperture at this focal length was f6.3, 4000th, ISO 4000. Yeah, sharpness on that. You can make out the words at the top of the gas pumps. This is, of course, a processed image. It's not raw, but still, that is what's possible with this lens. Very unexpected. This was shot in a traffic jam, literally, on I-40 somewhere outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, I'm thinking. But the back of the road sign here, this is a raw. I've adjusted it a little bit for exposure. 1/500th of a second out the window with the 4Runner, 70 millimeters, f4.5. Let's go in a little bit more so you can see that sharpness. You can see the bolts on the underside of this road sign. Beautiful, beautiful sharpness. And again, that is more or less wide open at this focal length range. This is a processed black and white outside. This was in Kingman, Arizona. This is at almost to the maximum telephoto reach. It's 254 millimeters at 500th of a second. Processed, of course, and check out the detail of the moon. F14, so this is stopped down quite a bit. You can see the sharpness still in these light wires, this light pole, telephone pole. I've actually added in quite a bit of simulated grain to this one. Beautiful. I really wanted to, just so you know, this was this lens laying on top of an old gold mine outside of Kingman, Arizona. Out there, this is where I was talking about that lens drift and worried about the dust. But this is where I'm going to show you what a 70 to 300 millimeter difference is as far as focal length is concerned. Then we'll move over to Hoover Dam and I'll show you the same thing again. This is a completely raw image. This is at 300 millimeters. I thought this rock formation looked like a thumb. This is at f8, 1/250th of a second, 300 millimeters. Zooming in there to 200%. And then I'm going to zoom back out, and this is going to be 70 millimeters at all the exact same settings. ISO 64, 1/250th of a second. That's at 167 millimeters. And now we're moving back. And now we'll move to the Hoover Dam. This is the opposite side of the Hoover Dam from what you may be used to seeing. Again, raw file, 70 millimeters. Bring that back down just a little bit. That's 70 millimeters, f6.3, so not exactly wide open, but you can see the corner sharpness a little bit, getting a little soft there, even at f6.3 at 70. But we zoom in to the base of these induction towers, f6.3 again, 300 millimeters. Come on, man. There we go. Extremely sharp at 300 at the maximum aperture of f6.3, even at the corners. Very good. Here's another one from this is the Colorado River on the opposite side of the Hoover Dam that you're probably used to seeing, a little tour boat. 70 millimeters, f6.3. You see the detail there, kind of extraordinary. You can make out the people. And then I zoomed to 300 millimeters. Same settings again, f6.3. Yeah, you can just reach out and touch somebody with this lens. It just makes me really wonder why I don't generally carry a long end telephoto like this, folks. I'm not going to lie to you, it's just so versatile. This is Lake Mead, the upper end of Lake Mead. That's at 70 again. There's at 300 again. You can see the actual boat ramp down here. I think you can actually see a person. Yeah, people standing down there. That's at f11, 1/2500th of a second, 300 millimeters. You will not want for sharpness with the 70 to 300. That's I couldn't ask for any. As far as from practicalities purposes, that's really all the sharpness I think you're going to need. Here's another one from that same area. We're getting ready to end out here. This was at f5.6, 209 millimeters. Sharpness. Perfect. If not perfect, definitely not lacking. And again, very contrasted. This has been adjusted a little bit for the highlights. Let's take it back down to 0 here for the raw file. Yeah, very, very good. Again, very contrasty. Just take that back down, take the exposure back up. Yeah. Get a white balance going here based on the cloud. And there you go. Extremely versatile, extremely sharp. Like I said, the image stabilization, the in-camera image stabilization on this, at least with the camera I was using, the A7R Mark III, makes this lens an absolute powerhouse for more or less anything. I really didn't shoot any portraits with this, which I normally don't do that kind of photography anyway. But I think this is a lens that's going to fit into a lot of situations, and surprisingly to you and I both, in nighttime photography. Love this for low light situations, and actually I think you will too. So let's close all this out and give you my final thoughts on the Tamron 70-300. So what is our end game here, guys? What's the bottom line on Tamron 70-300mm? For all practical purposes, I think you saw from the image examples here, you're not going to be wanting for sharpness. I think the only time we saw any corner sharpening there, corner softening there, was when we were at the 70mm focal length end, that wide end, and we were kind of down towards that maximum aperture. I think it was 6.3. This goes down to 4.5 there. So I would really like to have saw it to be a little bit sharper there at the corners, especially at 6.3, because you go from 4.5, 5.6 to 6.3. But again, guys, very bearable, and that virtually clears up once you get above 100mm in focal length range. That being said, the contrast on this, very contrasty. Depending on your scene, if it's already highly contrasted anyway, you might have to dial back the contrast just a little bit, but again, that's personal taste. Just the same, personal taste on the vignetting. Normally, I don't even mention it anymore in my lens reviews unless it's just extremely pronounced, and it's not on this. There's no lens correction profile for this as of yet with Lightroom version V10. That was the latest version of Lightroom as of this recording, but it's really negligible, guys, and if you're me, you probably add that in anyway at the end of your processing. So what are you getting here? You're getting a weather-sealed telephoto 70-300mm weather-sealed lens for Sony. A modest aperture speed. It's not crazy fast, but then again, it does take advantage of the in-camera stabilization, all the in-camera lens corrections, and you saw quite unexpectedly how good this is in low light. I was shocked. I'm not too much worried about the aperture on this lens. The weight, extremely manageable. This is the lightest of the Tamron's recent telephoto lenses for Sony full-frame mirrorless cameras. This weighs in, what do we say on my scale, 597 grams with the hood as far as in a shooting configuration. Tamron says 545 grams. That's 19.2 ounces. And then 21.06 ounces. Compare that to some of those other lenses. This is very light, very manageable. Now, I would have liked to really have had the zoom lock on here. You saw it gets a little drifty, especially if you're carrying it around for extended periods of time. That may not bother you. It didn't necessarily bother me, but definitely something I would have wanted to have. Now, I want to mention this for the crop sensor shooters out there. If you're shooting any of the A6000 series, not the A7 series or anything, this one is actually compatible with anything that is an E-mount. Same mount, but with that, you'll have I think Sony has a 1.5 times crop factor. So this is 70-300. That would be a 105 to 450. Telephoto, so around in there. You just have a more limited field of view, so you can use this on the crop sensor cameras. I would actually highly recommend that, again, just for the weight. Sometimes it feels like the lens is shooting you on those sort of cameras. This would be kind of big on like an A6300 or something like that, but definitely not as nose heavy as some of those other lenses might be on the same camera. The best thing, guys, and I want to get this right here, the best thing as far as putting all this into perspective and placing the lens in at least a qualitative context is the price. This lens cost, at the time of this review, cost around $549, not even $600. Compare that to the 28-200mm f2.856, which at the time was $729 US. And then you have the 70-180mm VXD. That's the one with that autofocus that I absolutely love. That one is still going for $1,199. So you're getting half the price of that 70-180. Not as fast, not the VXD, but $549. More reach, makes use of whatever in-camera stabilization you have. That's quite the spread. That would be kind of arguable. Of course, those other lenses have the zoom lock. This one doesn't, so you're missing a few features, but all that being said, I highly, highly recommend the 70-300mm if you're looking for a budget-friendly telephoto. They can literally shoot anything. I didn't shoot any portraits for this per se, because I'm not generally a portrait shooter, but night photography, landscape photography, street photography. If you don't like getting up in people's faces with those faster prime lenses, you want a lot of reach. Well, we saw this one is definitely chock full of that. I don't think you're going to be disappointed, folks. I definitely wasn't. This was so refreshing of a lens to finally review from Tamron after coming off that 28-200, which is, like I said, kind of left me a little flat. Really put me back into loving these new Sony lenses for Sony full frame and crop sensor cameras from Tamron. As you can tell, folks, it is getting a little chilly out here in the studio right now, so I'm going to wrap it up. I do urge you to head over to Contrastly. I'm a co-founder over there. Check out that full-length written review of Tamron 70mm f4.5 f6.3 Di3 RXD. If you have any questions about it, post the comments over there or post them down here in the comment section of this video, and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you with an answer. So until next time, everybody, thank you so much, as always, for joining me here. I am Adam Welch. Have a good day, everybody.